project that was first recommended by state transportation planners, gosh, when I was working in City Hall in 1984, and the Beyond Lechmere study came out and it said, you know, this is a matter of equity, this will get cars off the road. And then when the big dig funding came through, there was a requirement because more cars are going to be put on the road to improve air quality by creating transit improvements as well. And yet it took many, many, many years, and actually a lawsuit by the Conservation Law Foundation to get the Green Line extension moving. But you know, ground was broken. Funding is in place, almost half of it from the federal government under a New Starts grant. But of course, the way MBTA conducts itself, they took down between 1,000 and 2,000 trees in the corridor that the low line of the commuter rail runs through in order to put in the tracks for the Green Line extension. Of course, they're leaving in place the diesel burning commuter rail lines now with no trees to buffer out the toxic air from people who live nearby. Because we need more intersectionality, we need to think more of how separate topics are actually part of the same big picture. And we conspicuously do not do that in transportation planning yet in this state. Although, you know, even under a brief period recently of having a Democratic governor, you know, who created this green dot program that was supposed to help decarbonize our transportation sector. We haven't. And now we have a governor who had to be sued again in order to get him to acknowledge that the state needed to comply with the Global Warming Solutions Act, the carbon emission reduction goals that were written into law by the legislature in 2008. I'm tearing through my minutes here, I can see. But you know, another thing I would ask to keep in mind, we're in Eastern Massachusetts, most of us live here. I think we're very, we focus on this part of the state, but we should be aware that in some parts of Massachusetts, public transportation is extremely limited where it exists at all, and that Berkshire County has no public transportation. And you know, when you think that a few years ago, the hospital in North Adams suddenly closed, and now the closest hospital that everyone has to go to is in Pittsfield, and you can't get there. You know, we need to think not only about MBTA and our own local needs, but as somebody suggested, we need to embrace the widest possible picture of human needs. And we need to make all kinds of alliances, even as we cross through, as we insist that silos be broken down, so that when we do transportation or anything else, that all needs are considered and all repercussions are considered. Because I mean, look at the relationship between transit and housing. Transit is a public good. It should be available to anyone. What has happened with a lack of investment in core mass transit, and a lot of people I'm sure here have experienced it, is that proximity to the T has become a rich person's privilege. And all of the housing, which is close to the T, is being bought up by developers or rich people, and the developers, of course, then, you know, make places fancy and sell them to rich people. And people who have lived in communities, neighborhoods for a long time have to move someplace else. And when they do that, how do they get to work? How do they get to church or to their clubs or to their relatives? How do they maintain their worlds? The Urban Land Institute, which mostly focuses on real estate for rich people, did this study a few years ago showing that people who have to move away from transit because they can't afford to live near it end up making up the difference in housing costs with the additional costs that they pay for transportation. So they're not getting ahead, and in a lot of cases they're worse off because it's not as possible to get around, and their employment opportunities are reduced. So yes, we got to think about transportation, but we got to think about how transportation connects or divides all the other parts of our lives, and how we can actually use positive synergies to make sure that that when these things get done, that they have an additive effect, that they accomplish several good goals at once instead of subtracting ones. And I think this is Councillor Zondervan arriving, which is a good cue, although I haven't seen my sign yet, that I should probably leave. Okay, the podium. Thank you very much.